about that you must greatly rejoice. Or when James is writing, they had been tested, and their faith had been tested on every level, because remember, they had come under much persecution. And Jesus reminded them in Matthew chapter 5, the trying. He says, when you're being persecuted, know this, it's accounted for something, because you are building for yourself a treasure in heaven when you're going through this. Go through it. And so in this time, remember, these are men filled with the Spirit of God. They have a great reputation. They have great wisdom. But they're going through trials. If you think of Paul and his trials, and you think of Peter and his trials, I mean, each of them, they could all pick out, if one spoke about what they went through, the other would say, well, I've been through some time. And the truth is, their trials compared to what we go through in this world, let's back off. Paul had to go through physical infirmities as well. And all he could say is, and remember, he said, I went to the Lord 3 times. And saying, Lord, why must I go through this again? I mean, I've been beaten so many times, shipwrecked so many times, put in prison so many times. And on all of this, even my own body has been afflicted. And he said, all the Lord could say is, my grace is sufficient. My grace, my favor in your life is sufficient. All you need is me. And so the truth is, in all of this, when you look at, that's why when they speak in this term, you can understand. At the end of the day, that's why you have to seek God in this and say, what are you showing me in this? What do you want to do through me in this? What is it that you want to get out of me in this? Because we can swallow ourselves so deep in our sorrow, in our suffering, that we won't see the end of it. And even though there is an end, we may not see the end. And so we live in it for a long time. And see, God doesn't want that for us. So get back to that part about counting it joy, because and the wisdom, to find the wisdom today, even as to what do we do in this. Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 6. And remember, when he writes, he's writing to the church and giving basically who the church is, what the church is, and giving us the whole thing about what the church has. And he talks about different things. He talks about relationships and all of that. And he says in verse 10 of Ephesians, says, finally, let me bring a conclusion to all that I've talked about in terms of what you have as the church, and what authority we have, what power we have, what great wisdom we have, and all these great things. He says, finally, brethren, he says, I want to say this to you, be strong in the Lord. And so, when we're going through the trials, there's only one thing to say. I think it's the great wisdom man Solomon said, let's hear the conclusion. In all that he said before, he says, let's hear the conclusion. The conclusion of everything is fear God and keep His commandments. Paul comes with his finally, my brethren, I'm going to say this to you. Be strong in the Lord. Empower yourself with the strength that comes from God and God alone. And he says this because of what's coming after. He says, be strong in the Lord. Empower yourself in the power, or the domineering, or the dominating power of His might, or His ability. All our strength is removed. So that's where there's no more pride anymore. There's no more arrogance in who I am and what I have and what I can do and what I'm able to do. Now it's rested in Him, in God. I'm empowering. So when you empowering, it means there's something you have to do. You have to make a choice. You have to make a decision. You have to be willing to be able to set yourself to say, I'm allowing God to empower me. And he says, and in the power, or in that dominating, the dominion power, the power that rests not on an earthly level, but the dominating power, the dominion power that has authority over all. What did Jesus say to the disciples? All authority is given unto me. And he said to them, when he sent them out, I give you power over all the demonic powers that exist, over all sicknesses. He says, I say to you, brethren, finally, be strong. Empower yourself in this domineering, this dominion power that comes from the ability of God and what God can do. What is God able to do in this? And he says in verse 11, and how do you do this? Put on the old armor of God. This for me is asking, what do I do in this time? This is the wisdom in it. Put on the old armor of God, that you may be able to stand against every wiles of the devil. All of the wiles of the devil, or another word to use there, every distress that the devil brings. Every little thing that you're going through, and think about it. Every time you put on the armor of God and you know that the enemy is going to come. Now, there's no doubt about the fact that the enemy is going to lunge everything that he can at you. And the enemy knows at that point in which you're going to step up to the next place of where you have to go, he knows exactly when to come in and to bring what he needs to bring, to just do what? To deal with your faith, to attack your faith, to attack you ultimately. And the Bible says you empower yourself with this dominating power and ability that comes from God. You put on the old armor of God. This is you in action. You put on the armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. And that stand, I like the fact that when you use the word stand, it doesn't mean just sitting back and waiting for something to happen. It's a word saying you need to take on. You need to go up against the devil before he comes up against you. And when you go up against him, know this, that he's not going to sit quiet and wait for something to happen. He's going to react. He's going to retaliate. They say you don't trouble a hornet's nest and think nothing's going to happen. You don't go beating on a hornet's nest and think everything's going to be okay. You get ready to run afterwards. But if you're protected, you don't need to run. I've seen the beekeepers come to take some bees away from the property that we have. I mean, I wouldn't go near it. But he could go in and just take it out because he's armed. And so I believe this, that God, if we empower ourselves and we strengthen ourselves with the ability and the power that God gives us, let the enemy bring what he wants to bring. Let him bring on all that he can. Listen to this. Verse 12 says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, and against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places." When he says the wiles of the devil, he says the devil is going to come at you in every angle, and he's using this, there's this hierarchy that the devil approaches us with, and he's going to attack you on every level from the top to the bottom. I mean, when you start off as a believer, maybe there's some small demon will come and trouble you, but as you get up, as you get to do other things, you find yourself, you're going to face bigger devils, as it were. You're going to deal with different principalities and powers. You're not just going to deal with some small demon that's coming, maybe an alcohol demon or a drug demon or whatever. No, you're dealing with rulers. You're challenging the principalities of darkness, as it were. You're challenging the authorities that the darkness presents. And so as you face all of these things, the Bible says that's why we have to empower ourselves. That's why we have to strengthen ourselves. So when you're going through this, you need to identify and say, well, I know this devil. I know what he wants to do. I know what his attempt is. The Bible gives us that clear indication of what it is that we have to do. We know what the scriptures say about it. Greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. We know that we have authority. And we know the Bible says in Ephesians 3 verse 20 that he is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can pray or that we can ask for, that we can even imagine. We know all these scriptures, but the truth is there's something that we have to do. We have to do. We have to approach ourselves with this. And so he gives us in this here, and he says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places." Verse 13, he says, "Therefore take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all to stand." Then it starts in verse 14. It says, "Stand therefore." Second time. This is the second time it says, "Therefore, take up the whole armor of God." Know that you're not going to go out and fight some flesh and blood. You're fighting against the devil and the devil himself. And you're better arm yourself with all that God gives you. But now note the kind of defensive things that God gives us, the protective measures and the weapons that God gives us. And he says, "Therefore take up the whole armor of God." That means you put everything, whatever God gives you, you put it. But you see, think about this. You have the weapons and you have these protection garments, if you want. If you don't take it, the devil's going to beat you sick and silly. There's no soldier is going to go out into battle without the proper gear. Let him go out. He can go out, but he get beaten up so badly, he may not return. He says, stand therefore having, he says, "Now take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day." And if you've done all, you still fight. You keep resisting. What do? Stand therefore, he says. Look at how he starts.